I'm Nate Eaton, and this is True Crime Rocket Science.
In April 1996, Patsy Ramsey appeared on the cover of Woman's Magazine, and they did a profile on JonBenet's mother. One of the things Patsy said in this article was, "I'd love to find the time to paint." Well, evidently she did. In February 1999, barely 3 years later and 8 months prior to Alex Hunter's announcement of the grand jury's decision, an interesting article appeared in Boulder Weekly titled "A Ramsey Story Not Found in Schiller's Book." It reveals more about a side to Patsy we know a little about, and it also potentially reinforces an impression of Patsy we already have from the kidnapping phase and the ransom note, that she perhaps isn't quite as she seems. It's easy to forget that the murder weapon in this case came from something that belonged to Patsy Ramsey, a paintbrush of all things, found in Patsy's paint tote.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Hope you guys are having a good weekend. Now, although Patsy's paint tote is literally at the ground zero of the crime scene, in the basement, right outside the wine cellar door and just feet from where JonBenet was found, we want to follow the paint tote and the underestimated art narrative outside the basement and outside the Ramsey house. Remember, we've heard that Dr. Bufe's wife was a well-regarded pastel artist, and possibly one of her paintings was in JonBenet's bathroom. Possibly her bedroom was decorated by her as well. We don't know that. That's a speculation. But someone who probably, through her friendship with Patsy, encouraged her to paint. That makes sense, right? Now also remember that JonBenet alone visited Dr. Bufe over 30 times in 3 years. That's many visits to this doctor. And Patsy herself also had cancer and painted while she had cancer in John Andrews' room, sometimes with JonBenet drawing pictures beside her. But Patsy's illness may have also led to supportive visits both from Penny and her doctor husband. In this analysis, we're going to deal with 5 insights from Patsy's paint tote. Before we get to that, thank you to Adrienne Mintzer for this review of Christmas Star. She writes, "If you think you already know this case, you don't." She also writes, "Having just finished this book, I found there is much I've never heard before, enough to make me cry several times during the reading of the book." She also writes, "This book opened my eyes to a lot of things I've not come across anyplace else, and was a fascinating read which I didn't want to end. I give it 10 stars out of 10. Thank you very much, Adrian, for that. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. So, 5 insights from Patsy's paint tote. Number 1, Patsy did an art class at Colorado University in 1996. Did you guys know that? I met Patsy Ramsey a couple of months before the murder of her daughter. It was in a beginning painting class offered through the continuing education program at Colorado University. Though everybody there was dressed appropriately in scruffy clothes and smocks, Patsy arrived wearing an expensive sweater with ornate flowers embroidered across her breasts. She had a giant diamond ring on her left hand. Now, this is particularly useful because of its time relevance. A couple of months before the murder means Patsy attended this class perhaps in the summer of 1996 or even later. And as we know from that Woman's Magazine article, Patsy communicated her desire to resume with art. We also know that Dr. Bufe was affiliated with Colorado University and the university also employed Burke Ramsey's best pal Doug's parents, Susan and Glenn Stein, in their various capacities. The Ramsey home is also very close to Colorado University. Number 2, Patsy's obsession with appearances. Now, most artists tend to wear clothing that can get dirty, but not Patsy. Even in this environment, Patsy's pageantry was on full display. She has to dress up to impress. I've often heard people saying it was completely normal for Patsy to wear the same clothes the next morning, the day after Christmas, as to what she wore to the dinner party to the Whites. And that might be true for you, but I think if you say that, you just don't know Patsy. and you don't know beauty queens. There's also the comment in this section, in this excerpt, about the giant diamond ring on her left hand, which Judith Phillips also quizzed Patsy about. Well, it's yet another example of Patsy caring an awful lot about appearances. Let's just quickly jump into Afternoon with Judith Phillips, an article or interview that was done in February 2000. This is what Judith Phillips says about that diamond ring. I noticed that Patsy had this humongous diamond ring, and I looked and I said, "Oh my God, Patsy, where did you get that?" And Patsy said that she got it in Texas when they had stayed in Texas in the summer for a short time. And Patsy saw all these Texas women with their big rocks, and she wanted one too. Well, Patsy got what she wanted. Judith Phillips also said, "I realized that having observed Patsy when she first moved here, meaning to Boulder, how important money and her appearance was." And I think pretentious people who care a lot about appearances not only don't want to look bad, but might care more than most about hiding things that might make them look bad, right? That brings us to number 3. Patsy paraded her painting around the class. Now, if you think Patsy's pageantry was limited to pageants, to only pageants, think again. Here we see Patsy parading her art. That's the word used by the person in this art class. It's not my word, that's the word that they're using. And that's a kind of pageantry inside the art class. And all of them notice it and think it's kind of odd. So this is an excerpt. Most of the students had never painted before, so by the end of class, most canvases looked like sloppy crap. Well, except for Patsy's. She painted a still life of flowers in a box on a porch, and it was obvious from the somewhat sophisticated level of shading and color mixing that she had had previous training. Just the same, she paraded the painting around the class, showing it to everyone and saying, "Look, I've never painted before. Do you think it's any good?" I distinctly remember this being very odd because we were all strangers, and here she was obviously lying to gain our approval. Later, her previous experience as a painter was proven true in the media. And this brings us to number 4, Patsy's honesty in question. Now think about those words. She was obviously lying to gain our approval. That's quite a strong statement. Is it accurate? Now it's one thing for Patsy to show her art proudly to fellow students, but to say, "Look, I've never painted before. Do you think it's any good?" Well, that's completely different. And do you think it's true when Patsy says, "I've never painted before"? Well, what we see seems to be Patsy trying to dupe her art classmates into them thinking she was better than she really was. And as the artist notes, they confirmed that Patsy did have previous experience as a painter, just as they suspected she had. And think about the painting, suggesting that Patsy didn't have any experience, and the ransom note suggesting certain things as well, right? And certain people not being convinced by what was being suggested in the ransom note. Number 5, very odd behavior. Now, why did Patsy have such a strong need to win the approval of strangers? Well, don't pageants teach and train precisely that? And I do want to emphasize where she says very odd behavior. It's not just odd behavior. It is very odd behavior, right? I distinctly remember this being very odd. Not just odd, very odd. And it is. And aren't the rewards for gaining the approval of strangers, especially in pageants, disproportionate for those who win? And think about it, those who win can see their entire lives change. I'm talking about pageants. Those who lose can see their entire lives change as well. I mean, in the context of a crime scene. Winning and losing hinges on something as fickle as appearances. Change the appearance of something and you can change your fate. You can change your reality. Now have a look at these images from a Colorado Christmas at the Ramseys. And these are screen captures from Peter Boyle's website, 1998. Just look how ostentatious the decor is in this house. And Patsy even puts her house on display and basically says, look, do you think it's any good in terms of the house, right? And if you think about this little incident, this little anecdote in 1996 in the art class, this whole idea about, changing appearances and changing reality, and looking for the approval of strangers, but by trying to create a certain impression. Isn't that what happened in this case? There's also a little more to this story and the reason Patsy stopped attending the class, which is kind of humorous, but you can read about that on your own time. I'll put a link to that in the description. I'm not going to take it further than that. In recent news, John Ramsey did an interview with Nate Eaton. It is quite interesting. John Ramsey just once again engaging and telling his story. And I will try to unpack some of the comments and statements made in that recent interview sometime this week. So look out for that. I'll also put a link to the interview Nate Eaton gave to John Ramsey. By the way, Nate Eaton's also interviewed me when I was in Boise, Idaho. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.